looking at old white men.
I've had an appreciation for cultures for as long as I can remember. As a kid, my dad would take us to the Field Museum on Sundays in Chicago. Driving down along Lakeshore Drive was a treat in itself. Seeing the skyline of downtown Chicago was exciting. Entering the museum campus with its grand design would put me in a good mood. The whole downtown area signified endless possibilities for me. Life felt long, and I felt there was so much to look forward to. I think I felt this way because everything looked pretty, and all around me I saw people happy and enjoying themselves. It was very different from the neighborhood I grew up in. The Field Museum was a day out, when we could momentarily leave our little apartment and have experiences outside of our little world, our culture. Would I get bored as a kid reading signage and looking at archaeological finds? You bet I did. But looking out from one of the upper level floors of the Field Museum changed that boredom to inspiration. I was standing in a building full of knowledge, cultures, histories. It was an educational space that was more elevated than my public school. I knew there was more to my little world because of my many trips to the Field Museum. Hi friends, I no longer live in Chicago, but I still visit museums, and, well, you're finding me at the Kelvin Grove Art Gallery and Museum in Glasgow. The other day, I realized that I hadn't stepped foot in this art gallery and museum. It has an array of collections and paintings, and it's completely free. And because I've embarked on my own art journey, I was rather curious to see what I could learn from this little trip. On the ground floor, I immediately spotted a section on Indigenous cultures of the Americas. Am I a person who likes taking their time reading and reflecting on every display that calls my name? I sure am. And on top of that, I have to call David over to share what my thoughts are, because contemplation just isn't enough for me. Walking around the space reminds me how much I miss being surrounded by my culture. I miss it every day, especially the food. I miss having pan dulce with my taza de canela. I miss the supermercados where I can find galletas de coco. I miss the carnitas that my dad would buy every other Sunday. And of course, I miss my family. Living abroad is interesting. The dynamic with your family changes. You end up being out of the loop in terms of updates and what's going on with everyone. You feel guilty for not being there with your family. Bonds that were once strong feel a bit broken. Not intentionally, though. You become an outsider, and sometimes you're confused with how to keep in touch. And yet, I wouldn't change where I've chosen to settle down. However, I didn't always feel this way. And for a very long time, I complained about Scotland, comparing it to Chicago. I would highlight everything that was wrong here in Scotland on a regular basis. I put Chicago on a pedestal and defended it with aggressive love. This dislike for Scotland had nothing to do with its culture. It had everything to do with my reason for coming to Scotland in the first place, which was education. When I chose to uproot my life in Chicago for Scotland, I chose to trust the process, the path towards my authentic self. Up to that point, I felt I had worked hard to reroute. I had disempowered my ego. I felt I had put out nothing but love and good energy into the universe. Trusting the process lost its meaning for me when everything spiraled. I spiraled and my career spiraled. I couldn't trust anything or anyone after my toxic experience here in education. I kept asking myself what I did to deserve this. I had gone through so much to get to this point, and yet I felt the universe had played an evil, dirty trick on me. This feeling lasted until my therapy sessions started making sense. And little by little, I began to see the bigger picture, the details I had overlooked because I was severely depressed. Before any spiraling had begun, I had met David, my husband, my cameraman. From the first time we met, I knew David's kindness and warm-heartedness was special. His spirit was infectiously beautiful and the world felt right with him. I felt safe. So when my educational pursuit turned into a painful nightmare, he was there, ready to step up and fight for me. David has been my number one fan since we've met. During many tearful moments, where I questioned whether I would find where I belonged, he hugged me and reassured me that it would happen. David has been in full support of my creativity before I could muster the courage to actually trust it again. It's been difficult to trust the process again, to have hope that what I'm planting now is going to grow and flourish. How do we trust that everything will work out again? This is a question that I didn't know I would ever find the answer to. I didn't know if therapy would help me get closer to an answer. I kept thinking that I would have this huge light bulb moment in therapy and everything would be figured out. That didn't happen, friends. As the years went by and I continued in therapy, I learned about myself and the impact of the world on my mental health. I began to notice what didn't serve me. I began to realize what was worth prioritizing, even if it wasn't practical. I became aware that my time was precious and I wasn't going to let anyone dictate the order of my priorities. It turns out, regardless of all the crap I've been dealt with, I still loved myself enough to not settle. I still believed in myself. I knew what I wanted to do. I just needed to commit to the change. Art and content creation was the change, and though I was terribly scared to try this out, I felt giddy and my mind was already building new dreams and building a new love for life. And that's when I felt I could trust the process again. Trust the universe. When the genuine desire to build dreams entered the vicinity of my mind. I'm sure that's what these artists with their art displayed here at Kelvin Grove did. Trusting the process has existed for ages, and yet since the journey is so different for each and every one of us, it feels like we are the first to encounter all these emotions and thoughts. None of these artists that stand before me gave up though. They created tangible pieces of art, which will forever inspire. Their creativity, their authenticity is their body of work, and I think that's the dream. To embed my authenticity into society so that it helps others on their path to their most authentic selves. This week, I'm wrapping up the week-long course with Toby Sketchloose, who is an artist and teacher. The last sketch I had to complete for the course is a lighthouse. Before I tackled it, I watched Toby create his version of the reference photo, and of course, he made it seem effortless. When the lesson ended, I thought this could go really bad real easily. However, after everything I learned from Toby so far, there was nothing left but to trust the process. The line work is what intimidates me the most. You can't erase away pen marks, and while Toby has explained not to overcorrect a line that has gone awry, I still fall into the habit of doing so. I also feel that my line work is weak. Weak in its ability to develop character without overdoing it. I want my lines to convey different textures and feelings because I want to feel better about my line work and overall just have a better understanding of the combination of ink and watercolors. I've signed up for Toby's beginner-friendly course titled Ink and Watercolor Sketching, which I'm officially starting next week. It's quite interesting how my art journey has evolved so far. I went from drawing in the evenings as a coping mechanism for the emotional chaos around me to enlisting in a course. I can even see the next steps after that as well, continuing on my education with Toby and eventually drafting my first children's book. I went from not knowing how to define my art journey to finding somewhat of a concrete path. I leaned into art and trusted the process. I trusted that with time, I would find a way in, a way that would strengthen my curiosity and drive. While I know that we can't control everything that happens in the future, I feel reassured and I have my marriage to thank for that. David and I met during circumstances that were far from ideal. He was finalizing a divorce that had been legally dragging on, and I was experiencing an implosion of trauma due to my higher education pursuits. We both knew what we felt was real, but legally, the only way to stay together was to get married. We were both in our late 30s, but we had only known each other for a little bit more than a year. I didn't know how this would turn out. A forever partnership with a tall, tattooed, ears pierced Scottish man in a small seaside town. It didn't make sense to get married so soon, but something inside of me knew it was the right thing to do. Our love felt right, and so I trusted the process. After being together for 5 years, our relationship is stronger than ever. The joy and direction my marriage has given me on a personal level has been life-changing. I'm in alignment with myself, my thoughts, my values, and my decisions, my actions. I'm probably the healthiest version that I've ever been. I just needed to trust David and his love. Trusting the process means we have to be okay with not being in control of every single detail. That we trust our foundation enough to leave the door open to new inspiration and ideas. Every time I touch the white page with my brush, I feel that I'm giving gravity permission to take over. Paint moves down along the page at different rates and shapes because of the slant of my wooden drawing board. The free-spirited movement of watercolors always surprises me when I return to my desk and lay my eyes upon how they've dried, and therefore what they've added to the sketch. I build the scene based on how the colors overlap each other after the first application of watercolor. In this case, the reds of the lighthouse, the blues of the houses, and the purples of the rock create a soft, dreamy scene. The sky turned out pretty cool. I kept it simple and over-exaggerated the colors a bit from the reference photo. I began to overwork the application of color to the lighthouse, and before I continued to make it a big fat red crayon, I moved on to the rocks. The reference photo displays an array of light and shade on the rocks, and I recreated that by adding yellow and blue tones. The colors of my sketch are not at all like the reference photo. I like how the scene revolves around a limited color scheme. It makes it more whimsical, more fun. By the time I was done adding color, I felt the pressure was on. Adding the last bit of pen was going to make or break my last sketch for this week-long course. I didn't know if I could continue my soft lines without my hands being too shaky or indecisive. I was like, right, where do I start? I took my 0.4mm pen and decided to take a go at the lighthouse first. I darkened its outline and its windows. I delicately darkened the top circular bit. If I was going to mess up anything, it would be this part. Capturing the dimensions of circular shapes is not my forte just yet. I inked carefully, delicately. For the rocks, I knew I wanted to make them bold. I let the patterns that the watercolor had created guide me. I then darkened a few bits with my pen more. I wanted this uneven look where the rock could be more jagged. I chose not to darken any of the lines of the sky. I wanted the orange sitting on top of the blue to grab your attention. No pens were added to the lines of the ocean. It wasn't the center of attention, so I felt there was no need. As I placed the lid back on my pen, I had to stand up and look at what I had done. This is where I stood after leaning into the art thing. I was in disbelief that with a bit of structured teaching, I had put together a scene that looked like a scene from a children's book. I didn't know what to think, but I felt elated, grateful, and motivated. Grateful for trusting the process. Grateful for trusting my husband, his love, and his support. Grateful for staying true to my feelings. My husband insists on framing this sketch as he believes it marks a milestone of my art journey. Usually I shy away from wanting any of my work displayed because I'm still at the very beginning, and yet this time was different. It's not been an easy start of the year, and to have this physical piece of progress is a reminder that all the little ups and downs have been worth it. Thanks for joining me this week, friends. I hope you enjoyed peeking into Kelvin Grove Art Museum and Gallery and wrapping up my week-long course with me. Most importantly, I hope this episode helps you trust the process as you face changes and obstacles. It's not about having all the answers. It's about being in alignment with your values, decisions, actions, and thoughts, and reflecting when any of those items are misaligned. Comment below on what your definition of trusting the process is. I would love to hear what you have to say. All right, that's it for now. I'll see you next week, friends.